Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're diving into Petrobras's 2023 Form 20F. Now,
I know.
when you hear financial document, you probably don't think, oh, this is going to be fun. But trust me, this is not your average, light reading. This document, it's packed with insights about, like, one of the biggest energy companies in the world. We're talking billions of dollars, global operations, and a fascinating glimpse into the future of energy.
What's really cool about this deep dive is that it's not just numbers on a page. You're really like peering into this company that operates at a colossal scale, facing all these complex challenges and making bets on a future that's over 100 years away.
Over 100 years away. All
Right.
right, now you've got me interested. That's where these global notes come in, right? The report mentions these notes due in 2051 and 2115. Is someone really betting on Petrobras being around in 2115?
It really shows how some investors in the energy sector think long term. But for Petrobras, it's more than just like a date on a bond. It speaks to the massive scale of their operations and all the long-term planning involved in navigating an industry as complex as oil and gas.
Okay, so these global notes, what are they exactly, and how do they impact Petrobras today?
Okay, so imagine you lend money to a friend, but instead of paying you back in like a few weeks or months, they promise to repay you decades, even a century from now. That's essentially what these global notes are. They're long-term debt securities issued by Petrobras to raise capital. The fact that they have notes maturing so far in the future indicates their commitment to long-term projects and investments, but it also means they carry a significant financial burden.
Yeah, that makes sense. But what does that actually mean for their day-to-day operations? Are they constantly thinking about this massive debt?
Absolutely. It's like, imagine carrying around a huge backpack full of rocks. You can still move and function, but it's going to weigh you down and impact your decisions. That's kind of what it's like for Petrobras with their debt. Every investment they make, every project they undertake has to be considered in light of this massive financial obligation.
It's like they're playing a high-stakes game of chess, always thinking several moves ahead. But it's not just the debt that's influencing their decisions. The report makes it clear that the Brazilian federal government, as the controlling shareholder, also has a significant say in how things run.
Yeah, that's a key point. Unlike most publicly traded companies, where the primary focus is maximizing shareholder value, Petrobras has to balance that with the priorities of its controlling shareholder, the Brazilian government. This can create a really interesting dynamic where national interests, like ensuring stable fuel prices for Brazilian citizens, might sometimes clash with the desire of minority shareholders to see maximum profits.
So it's like a balancing act between keeping the lights on for Brazilians and keeping investors happy. That's got to be tough.
Exactly. It adds another layer of complexity to their decision-making process. For example, the government might want to keep fuel prices low to help consumers, but that could squeeze Petrobras's profit margins and potentially impact their ability to invest in new projects or return dividends to shareholders.
It's like they're constantly walking a tightrope.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of risks, there's one detail in the report that really jumped out at me. Apparently, Petrobras doesn't fully insure against business interruption in Brazil, including potential labor strikes. And get this, they also don't insure most of their assets against war or sabotage. Why would they take such a risk?
That's a bold move, and it definitely raises questions about their risk tolerance. Most companies in the oil and gas sector, especially those operating in potentially volatile regions, go to great lengths to insure themselves against all sorts of potential disruptions.
So is Petrobras just incredibly confident in their operations? Or are they underestimating the potential threats?
It's likely a combination of factors. They might have a high degree of confidence in their security measures, their ability to manage labor relations, and their assessment of the geopolitical landscape. But it could also be a calculated decision based on the cost of insurance versus the perceived likelihood of these events.
So maybe they're saying, hey, the premiums for this kind of insurance are astronomical, and we think the risk is relatively low, so we'll self-insure. It's a gamble. But I guess every business decision involves some level of risk.
Absolutely. And in Petrobras's case, the stakes are incredibly high. They're operating in a complex and volatile industry with billions of dollars on the line and a responsibility to both their shareholders and the Brazilian people.
Okay, let's shift gears for a minute and talk about something that impacts everyone. Fuel prices. The report dives into Petrobras's dependence on international oil prices, which, as we all know, can be about as predictable as the weather. How are they navigating this constant price roller coaster?
The volatility of oil prices is a major challenge for any company in this sector, and Petrobras is no exception. For years, they followed a policy of trying to stabilize domestic fuel prices, even when international prices were fluctuating wildly.
So they were basically trying to shield Brazilian consumers from the global price swings.
Exactly. But this strategy had its drawbacks. When international prices were high, Petrobras was selling fuel domestically at a loss, which put a strain on their profitability. And when international prices were low, they were missing out on potential revenue.
It's a classic dilemma, balancing the needs of the company with the demands of the government
Yeah,
and the expectations of consumers.
right. And in May 2023, Petrobras made a significant shift in their approach. They moved away from that fixed pricing policy and adopted a more market-driven approach, aligning domestic fuel prices more closely with international benchmarks.
So now, when oil prices go up globally, Brazilian consumers feel it more directly at the pump.
Yes, and that's created some tension, as you can imagine. The government wants to keep fuel prices affordable, but Petrobras needs to protect its own financial health.
It's a tough balancing act, but it sounds like they're trying to find a middle ground, a way to stay competitive in the global market, while also fulfilling their responsibilities to Brazil.
Exactly. And this tension between global market forces and national interests is a recurring theme in Petrobras's story. It's something we'll see play out in various ways as we continue our deep dive.
That's a great point. And speaking of recurring themes, there's another big one that we need to address. The environmental impact of their operations. We all know that the oil and gas industry has a significant footprint, and Petrobras is no exception. What does the report reveal about their environmental performance and their efforts to address these challenges?
The report highlights the environmental risks they face, and it's no small list. Oil spills, greenhouse gas emissions, impacts on biodiversity. These are all serious concerns that come with the territory of oil and gas exploration and production. But it's not just about acknowledging the risks, it's about how they're managing them and what steps they're taking to mitigate their impact.
So are they just throwing money at the problem, or are they taking a more proactive approach?
They're definitely investing resources. But it's more than just writing checks. They've implemented a program called the Commitment to Life program, which focuses on preventing accidents, minimizing their environmental footprint, and promoting sustainability across their operations.
That sounds promising. But how do we know if this program is actually making a difference? Are they just talking the talk, or are they walking the walk?
That's where the data comes in. The report highlights specific metrics they're tracking, like their total recordable incident rate, or TRIR, which measures workplace safety, and their VZUO indicator, which tracks oil spill volume. By comparing their performance to industry averages, we can get a sense of how they're stacking up.
Okay, I'm all about the numbers. Give me the rundown. How does Petrobras compare to others in the industry?
In 2023, their TRIR was 0.80. Now, that might sound like a random decimal, but it actually represents the number of recordable workplace safety incidents per million hours worked. And when you compare that to the industry average of 0.90 in 2022, it suggests that they're actually performing better than their peers. When it comes to workplace safety,
That's encouraging. So they're not just drilling for oil, they're doing it with a focus on safety. What about the oil spills? Are they managing to keep those in check?
their VAZU indicator tells a positive story as well. They significantly reduced spills in 2023, with only 7 spills exceeding 1 barrel, their VAZU value, which measures the total volume of oil spilled, was dramatically lower than the average performance of their peer group in 2022.
So they're making progress on both safety and spills. That's a good sign. But let's be real. The core of their business is still oil and gas. And those aren't exactly known for being the most eco-friendly industries. How are they addressing the elephant in the room, the global shift towards renewable energy?
That's the billion-dollar question, isn't it? And to answer that, we need to look beyond their current operations and delve into their diversification efforts. They're making investments in renewable energy sources and biofuels, signaling a recognition that the future of energy isn't just about fossil fuels.
This is where I start to get really intrigued. The report mentions some pretty cool stuff like this Gas and Energy Plus program and some innovative new technologies. Can you give us the inside scoop on what they're up to?
The Gas and Energy Plus program is all about increasing competition. In the Brazilian natural gas market, they're aiming to boost domestic production, attract new players, and ultimately make natural gas more accessible and affordable. It's a strategic move that aligns with the global trend towards cleaner burning fuels.
Natural gas is often touted as a bridge fuel
Hmm?
between fossil fuels and renewables, right?
Exactly. It burns cleaner than coal and oil, making it a less carbon-intensive option in the short to medium term. But it's not just about natural gas. They're also exploring biofuels,
No.
offshore wind potential, and even partnering with companies like China Energy International Group for renewable energy projects.
Wow. So they're not just dipping their toes in the water. They're diving headfirst into the world of renewables. But let's not forget about the people behind all these operations. Petrobras has a massive workforce, and the report touches on their complex relationship with labor unions. What's the story there?
Their workforce is indeed massive, with over 40,000 employees. And like any large organization, they have to navigate the complexities of labor relations, especially in an industry that's often prone to labor disputes.
So are they constantly battling it out with the unions, or have they managed to find a balance?
They have collective bargaining agreements in place with both oil and maritime trade unions, covering key issues like wages, working conditions, and benefits. It's a delicate balance between protecting workers' rights and ensuring the smooth operation of their business.
It's interesting how these large-scale operations always come down to human relationships and finding that common ground. What about employee benefits? How does Petrobras treat its workforce in terms of compensation and perks?
They offer a fairly standard package for the industry, including complementary pension plans, medical assistance, and pharmacy benefits. These are pretty typical for a company of their size and scope, especially in a competitive sector like oil and gas.
Okay, so it's not like they're offering unlimited vacations and free gourmet lunches, but they're keeping up with industry norms. But I'm curious, with operations spanning multiple countries, do they have to adjust their benefit structures
Sure.
to accommodate local norms and regulations?
You're absolutely right. The report mentions that some of their consolidated subsidiaries have their own benefit plans, reflecting the need to adapt to diverse labor markets and regulatory environments. It adds another layer of complexity to managing a global workforce.
It's like they're juggling multiple balls at once. Speaking of global reach, Petrobras isn't just confined to Brazil, right? They've got a footprint that extends across continents.
That's correct. They're active in multiple countries, including Argentina, Bolivia, and Colombia. They've even recently expanded back into Africa, specifically the Democratic Republic of São Tomé and Príncipe, signaling their ambition to diversify their portfolio and tap into new markets.
So they're not just a Brazilian company, they're a global player. But let's zoom back in on their core business for a moment. The report reveals some pretty staggering numbers in terms of their oil and gas reserves and production capacity. Give us the lowdown on those impressive figures.
They're sitting on a treasure trove of oil and gas resources. Their proved reserves at the end of 2023 stood at a massive 10,921 million barrels of oil equivalent, and their production in that same year reached 2,782 million barrels of oil equivalent per day.
Those numbers are mind-boggling. It's hard to even fathom the scale of their operations. But with all that activity, they must be facing a pretty complex regulatory landscape, right? Especially in Brazil, where they're subject to various government levies and
Right.
production sharing agreements.
You hit the nail on the head. The report details the various government shares, royalties, and special participation payments they're obligated to make. They also operate under the Repetro-SPED and Repetro-Industrialization regimes, which are special tax incentive programs designed to encourage investment and development in the Brazilian oil and gas sector.
Okay, so Repetro-SPED and Repetro-Industrialization. Those sound like a mouthful. Can you break those down for us?
Imagine you're putting together a giant jigsaw puzzle. Each piece represents a different aspect of the Brazilian oil and gas industry: exploration, production, transportation, refining. These Repetro regimes are like special pieces that fit into the puzzle, offering tax breaks and other incentives to encourage companies to invest in specific areas and boost overall industry growth.
So it's a way for the government to steer the industry in a certain direction and encourage companies like Petrobras to play by the rules, right?
Exactly. It's a delicate dance between government control and private enterprise, with both sides trying to maximize their gains while ensuring the long-term sustainability of the industry.
It's a high-stakes game with a lot of moving pieces. But it's not just about navigating government regulations. They've also had to contend with some pretty significant legal challenges in recent years, haven't they? The report mentions the Lava Jato investigation and other legal proceedings. How have these scandals and lawsuits impacted their operations and reputation?
The Lava Jato investigation, a massive corruption scandal that rocked Brazil, definitely cast a long shadow over Petrobras. The report acknowledges the potential for ongoing legal proceedings and the lingering risk of reputational damage. They've had to implement robust compliance and anti-corruption measures to rebuild trust and demonstrate their commitment to ethical business practices.
It's a reminder that even giant corporations aren't immune to the consequences of unethical behavior. But let's shift our focus to something a little less dramatic, their financial health. The report delves into their capital structure, debt levels, and overall financial performance. What are some key takeaways?
Their balance sheet is complex, to say the least. They carry a substantial debt load, exceeding US $28 billion at the end of 2023. But they've been actively managing this debt, extending maturities, and optimizing their capital structure to reduce risks.
So they're not just burying their heads in the sand and hoping the debt fairy will magically whisk it away.
Not at all. They're taking a proactive approach, which is reassuring for investors and creditors alike. Their financial performance in 2023 was solid, with net cash provided by operating activities reaching US $43.2 billion.
Okay, so they're making money, but they're also carrying a lot of debt. It's a balancing act, as usual. But they're also under the watchful eye of credit rating agencies, right? What's their current credit rating, and what does it tell us about their financial stability?
In 2023, Moody's kept their credit rating at B1 with a stable outlook. S&P upgraded their rating to BB with a stable outlook, and Fitch did the same, upgrading them to BD with a stable outlook as well. These ratings suggest that while Petrobras carries a substantial debt load, their overall financial outlook is relatively stable, reflecting their strong market position, solid cash flow, and efforts to manage their financial risks effectively.
So it's not all doom and gloom on the financial front.
Not at all. They're facing challenges, but they're also demonstrating resilience and a commitment to responsible financial management.
That's good to hear. But let's not forget the human element again. Petrobras has this massive, diverse workforce. What can you tell us about their demographics, turnover rates, and efforts to promote diversity and inclusion?
They've been actively working to renew their workforce, with a focus on internal career mobility and attracting new talent through public selection processes. Their commitment to diversity and inclusion is evident in their initiatives aimed at promoting gender equality, racial equality, and the inclusion of people with disabilities. They're striving to create a workplace that reflects the diverse society they operate in.
That's commendable.
Well,
But it's not just about ticking boxes and meeting quotas, is it? It's about fostering a truly inclusive culture where everyone feels valued and respected. What concrete steps have they taken to combat harassment and discrimination, particularly in an industry that's traditionally been male-dominated?
they've implemented a mandatory e-learning course on preventing and combating discrimination, moral harassment, and sexual violence. They've also developed corporate guidelines on these issues, demonstrating their commitment to creating a safe and inclusive work environment.
It's good to see that they're taking these issues seriously and putting policies in place to address them. But let's zoom out again and consider the bigger picture, their corporate governance structure and their efforts to enhance transparency and accountability. What does the report tell us about how they're managing this complex organization?
Their corporate governance model is based on a set of rules and procedures designed to ensure that decisions are made ethically and transparently. The report details their board structure, statutory committees, and compliance mechanisms, highlighting their commitment to best practices in corporate governance. They also adhere to the corporate governance requirements of the New York Stock Exchange as a foreign private issuer, further reinforcing their commitment to transparency and accountability.
So they're not just playing by the rules, they're setting a high bar for themselves in terms of ethical conduct and transparent decision-making.
Exactly. And that's particularly important for a company of their size and influence, operating in a sector that's often scrutinized for its environmental and social impacts.
But let's circle back to one of the key themes that has emerged throughout our deep dive: the evolving energy landscape and Petrobras's efforts to adapt and position themselves for the future. What are your final thoughts on this?
Petrobras is at a crossroads. While oil and gas remain the core of their business, they're acutely aware that the world is shifting towards cleaner energy sources. Their investments in renewables, biofuels, and innovative technologies like HISEP demonstrate their commitment to diversifying their portfolio and reducing their environmental footprint. The energy transition is a global phenomenon, and Petrobras is actively navigating this complex terrain, aiming to remain a key player in the evolving energy landscape.
It's a fascinating story of a company grappling with immense challenges and opportunities. Their ability to balance their financial goals, social responsibilities, and environmental commitments will ultimately determine their long-term success. But before we wrap up part 2, let's leave our listeners with a thought-provoking question. Given all the information we've uncovered about Petrobras's operations, financials, risks, and future plans, what do you think are the biggest challenges and opportunities facing them in the years ahead? That's a great question to think about as we wrap up our deep dive into Petrobras. You've given us a really complex picture of this company, juggling all these different priorities, navigating an industry that's changing so quickly. So what do you think are the biggest challenges and opportunities facing them in the years ahead?
Well, I think one of the most significant challenges they face is balancing the demands of their controlling shareholder, the Brazilian government, with the expectations of minority shareholders and global market forces. It's this constant back and forth between national interests, maximizing profits, and the need to stay competitive in a globalized energy market.
Right. It's like they're trying to keep everyone happy. On one hand, they have the government, who might prioritize stable fuel prices for Brazilian citizens, or using Petrobras to boost the national economy. And then on the other hand, they have investors, who are mostly concerned with profits and returns. How do they keep both sides happy?
Yeah, it's tough. It requires this delicate balancing act, a lot of strategic maneuvering. They have to make decisions that satisfy both their controlling shareholder and the market, which can be a real challenge, especially when those interests clash.
And then there's the whole environmental piece, too. They're operating in an industry that's under so much pressure to reduce its carbon footprint. How do they reconcile their traditional oil and gas business with the global push for cleaner energy?
The energy transition is changing everything. Petrobras can't ignore it. While they're making progress in renewables and reducing their environmental impact, they're still heavily reliant on oil and gas, which presents a big long-term challenge. They need to speed up their transition to cleaner energy sources if they want to stay in the game.
They've got a lot of competition from other global energy giants, who are also investing a lot in renewables. Can Petrobras keep up?
That's the key question. They need to stay ahead of the curve in terms of technology, efficiency, and adapting to the market if they want to stay a global leader.
And as they expand internationally, they're also going to encounter new risks and challenges. Can they manage those risks effectively and make sure their global ventures are both profitable and responsible?
Expanding into new markets always comes with uncertainty, geopolitical risks, regulatory hurdles, cultural differences. They need to carefully assess and mitigate those risks if they want to succeed globally, and they need to do so in a way that aligns with their commitment to sustainability and responsible business practices.
It sounds like a constant balancing act, balancing different interests, managing risks, adapting to a changing world. But there must also be some incredible opportunities. For a company with Petrobras's scale and resources, what are some of the most promising avenues for growth and success?
I think one of their biggest opportunities is their commitment to innovation and new technologies, like the NYSE technology we discussed earlier. If they can continue to develop and implement these kinds of solutions, they can really become leaders in both efficiency and environmental responsibility.
It's like they're taking something that could be a problem, the need to reduce their environmental impact,
and turning it into an advantage.
Right. And they're also well positioned to take advantage of the growing demand for natural gas, which is seen as a cleaner alternative to coal and oil, at least for now. Their Gas and Energy Plus program is a good move. It's all about increasing competition and tapping into Brazil's natural gas reserves.
So they're using their expertise in fossil fuels to help them transition to cleaner energy. But what about their employees? They have a huge and diverse workforce. How can they use that to their advantage? Their workforce is one of their biggest strengths. By encouraging innovation, collaboration, and continuous learning, they can really empower their employees to drive positive change. Their initiatives to promote diversity and inclusion are also crucial for creating a more engaged and productive workforce, which leads to better results for the company.
It's clear that Petrobras is at a turning point. They're navigating a really complex and rapidly changing energy landscape, facing both big challenges and exciting opportunities. What's your final takeaway for our listeners?
I think Petrobras is a great example of the global energy transition in action. Their journey, with all its ups and downs, reflects the challenges and opportunities the whole world is facing. As we try to create a more sustainable and equitable energy future, their choices, investments, and commitment to innovation will shape not only their own future, but also the future of energy for all of us.
It's a story that's still being written, and one that we'll all be following closely. And that wraps up our deep dive into Petrobras 2023 Form 20 EFF. We've covered a lot, from their massive debt and global operations to their innovative technologies and commitment to sustainability. Hopefully, you've learned a lot about this company. But don't stop here. We encourage you to check out the source material yourself and come to your own conclusions about the challenges and opportunities ahead for Petrobras. Until next time, keep diving deep.